Good morning. My name is Marco Russo. Today I have a session about all except and all values. This is a 20-minute session, so we will focus on a specific part of DAX. My name is Marco Russo. As I said, I'm from SQL BI, where we produce content for DAX and data modeling for Power BI analysis services. And DAX is a topic where that I studied for many years. And the idea behind this small session is to explain why we should choose between two different, apparently similar techniques, or better, between two different techniques that produce apparently similar values. But I want to explain what is the actual difference between these two techniques and when you should choose one over the other. So I don't want to spoil anything, so let's start with the introduction to the session. So in DAX, you have a few functions to manipulate the filter context. And one of those functions is called ALLEXCEPT. ALLEXCEPT is a function that is actually a mix between remove filters and, or better, is a way to remove the filter from all the columns of a table, but just a few columns. And ALLEXCEPT is part of the family of functions called the filter modifiers, which are functions that can be used mainly in calculate or calculate table that alter these functions alter the filter context, and the goal of this manipulation is to obtain a particular calculation that you want. A very well-known function that we have in DAX is all. All removes any filter from a table or from a specific list of columns, even though nowadays we prefer to use remove filters in calculate to make it clear that we are not creating a table with all those columns. We're just removing the filter from the filter context. Technically, it's the same thing. Technically, using all or remove filters in calculate produces the same effect, but remove filters is more clear about the intention. Now, the right way to call ALLEXCEPT would be remove filters except. We don't have that function, we just use ALLEXCEPT, but just to give you an idea about this. Now, if I go to the next slide, when we write ALLEXCEPT table, column, column, for example, we remove all the filter from the table customer, but state and country. It means that we want to keep the existing filters over country and state and remove the filter from any other column without knowing which these columns are, which could be useful for maintenance. If in the future you will add other columns to the customer table, they will be removed without having to maintain your code. If you use the second or the third version, which remember are identical when they're used within calculate, well, we have to list all the columns of the table one by one. And so if you add a column to the table, you have to maintain it. For this reason, there are cases where you say, well, actually, I would like to use ALLEXCEPT because it allows me to write code that does what I need without having to worry about the future. But the point is ALLEXCEPT the right tool for what you need? Now we start a demo, and then we will go back to the slide at the end to explain when ALLEXCEPT is not necessarily the right thing to do, and what are the alternatives. In order to show you the example, sorry, I forgot to run this. In order to show you the example, I will use a simple report where I have to face let's say an issue, a calculation issue, which is the following. I want to compute for each row the percentage of the value that you see in sales amount compared to the corresponding continent. For this reason, I call this measure percentage of continent. Marco, now we have Visual Calc. I know, but wait a minute. Also with the Visual Calc, we could face the same problem I'm going to show you now, so be patient. What does it mean? Well, it means the following. Let's say that I have here UK, United Kingdom. So my goal is that in the cell percentage of continent here, I want to divide the number I highlighted now by the corresponding value in Europe. This is my goal. in order to achieve this goal, I have to write a division that divides those two numbers. But pay attention. If I drill down and I look at this other number, I want to divide this number by Europe again. So whatever selection I make, I want to do this division. This is my requirement. Make sense? Now, let's solve this problem. So in order to solve this problem, we start creating a measure, percentage of continent. You see that I prepared this measure in advance. Session is 20 minutes, so I have to be sure that we have, let's say, enough time. Sorry, I wanted to record this. I didn't start. Okay, here we go. Okay. And this measure is a division between sales amount and sales continent. So sales amount represents, let's go back down here. Sales amount represents, for example, the current value here. This is sales amount. Sales continent is a measure that should return this value. So this is the goal. I have to, if I write sales continent correctly, I will get that value back. So let's write sales continent. So sales continent now is blank. So if I write the right calculation here, I will get the right percentage. So how do I write this calculation? Well, let's start writing sales amount. So if I copy sales amount, now sales continent and sales amount are the same. But as you see, the problem with this approach is that the number I see here should be propagated across all these rows. Every country, every state, every city in Europe should display the same value. So I have to modify the calculation so that the result will be always the same. Now, when you design a measure in DAX, what is the right thing to do? The right thing to do is to think about, so I have the measure sales amount. Actually, the number I want is here, is exactly here. So what I want is the same value of sales amount in a different position of the report, in a different filter context. So if I evaluate the two filter contexts of the two cells, I can figure out what I need to do. And how can I do that? Well, let's start by drawing the filter context of the initial cell, United Kingdom. So United Kingdom has a number there. But if I think for a moment, what is the filter context for that cell? In other words, which filters are applied to sales amount evaluation for that cell? Well, I see two filters here. I see one filter is the continent. The filter for the continent is Europe. Okay? Europe. And I always think that I should not have used United Kingdom for discussing about Europe, but okay, that's okay. Come on. It's a prepared job, sorry. And then I write country, where I use UK. So this is the filter context of the cell that I highlighted here, okay, this cell here. This cell has this filter context. Now, what is the filter context for Europe? If you think for a moment, in order to obtain Europe, the filter context simply has to get rid of UK. If we remove UK from the filter context, we have the right number. Let's do that. So if I write calculate, with calculate, I can write calculate, remove filter from country. Okay? And it works. Here we go. You see that now every value with below Europe shows Europe. If I drill down North America, I have North America. Wonderful, it works. But wait a minute. What happens if I drill down UK? It doesn't work. Wait a minute, why is it not working? Well, if we go back to the whiteboard, if you consider now this cell, for example, Aberdeen, okay, this cell, in this cell there are three filters. Continent, country, and state. Okay? I don't know if it is a state, anyway, or city. So I draw here, let's say state, and there is Aberdeen. And you say, oh, Marco, simple. Now, if you remove this filter, this will work. Okay, let's do that. So now, I don't have to write another remove filter. I can just write here state. And I click enter, and now it works. But again, if I drill down again, now I have Charleston. I have to continue this again and again. Now, if you look at what I'm doing, every time I add another filter from customer, I want to remove it. So at this point, I say, wait a minute. I remember there is a function that does exactly this. Remove all the filters from the customer table, but keep continent if there is a filter there. And let's write. So if I write, instead of writing this code that has to be maintained and should list all the columns of customer, I could write all except with customer and continent. So I include after the first argument only those columns I want to keep in the filter context. I want to remove the filter from any other column. I click enter, and now it just works. It will work also if I add other levels or anything else in the visual. Any questions so far? All clear so far? Question there? Okay. The question is, will it work if I add other filters that are not included in the hierarchy? So let me, before answering this question, which is very, very good, let me show you how this model has been built. I'm using the geography hierarchy, which is a particular part of the metadata that I have in the customer table. But as you see, the customer table has many other things, like, for example, the age. For example, we have the gender. We have also the occupation, probably. I don't see the occupation, but there could be, right? The name, the customer name is here. What happens if I move, for example, the gender here in an additional level of this visualization? We can try, and what we will see is that it just, if I do the right thing, let's try again. If I go here and I add data and I get customer, let's say customer gender, now you see that when I drill down, Charleston, it still works. Now we have only one. Let's try again. We have to find maybe London. Let's go to another country that doesn't have so many. Nope. Okay, but at least in Italy, I know which states are large enough. So let's go to, for example, Torino. This is my. Oh no, these are very small parts. I don't know. Okay, we're out of luck. So let's try with. Well, we can try with something else. For example, I can remove city, and it just works. I can remove state, and it just works. You see that now we have male, female. So the hierarchy that you have in a table like this one is just a list of columns that you can place in the report. From a DAX standpoint, this object doesn't exist. From a DAX standpoint, you don't have a hierarchy. From a DAX standpoint, you just put a few columns in a certain order in a table that you display. Okay, that's it. Now, this works as long as I include columns from the same table, customer. What happens if I include product brand? Of course, product brand is not part of the customer. But at that point, if you really, so let me try just to show you this. If I use now, for example, product brand here, really? They changed the UI? I don't know. Well, no. Okay, product brand. So now you see that when I go at the product brand level, what happens is that I have different numbers, right? Because at this point, the product brand is not actually removed, but I'm still removing the filter from, so why you see the number that is different? Because this is a datum for Europe. This is Contoso for Europe, and so on. Make sense? If you want to get rid of that, you either write, let's go here. You either write, comma, remove filters, I don't know, product. That's an option. I want to remove the filter from any product, or product brand, or we could say sales. And this works. if you look at how this works, so for Europe, when I drill down, it is always Europe. For Australia, it is always Australia, and so on. One could say, wait a minute, why I can specify a table and a column from another table? Enter the expanded table. The expanded table is the definition of a table that includes all the other tables that can be reached through one or more many-to-one regular relationships. It's not a concept that you need every day, but actually it could be useful to do something strange like this one. I'm not suggesting you to use it, but it's an option that you have. Okay? Now, let me go back to the initial version where that was a customer continent, and here I want to restore the full hierarchy with all the levels. So let's go back to the situation I had before the question. What I've shown you works for this report if the user behave well. But one day the user could say, you know what, I want to remove the continent here. And if you remove the continent, what happens? Now, because the continent is no longer part of the visualization, and here is exactly the same problem you would have if you use the custom the visual calculations, because continent is not part of the visual, we don't have the filter for the continent. And so if we remove all the filters but continent is not filtered, we get the total for all the continents. Make sense? But if you remember my initial definition divide the current selection by the corresponding continent. You know what? Every country has only one continent. I know that. I can rely on that. My data supports that. I can make this assumption. How can I write the code so that it just works also in this report? Because this report is, one, something that the user can do by just unchecking this, or something that the user could have built ignoring the geography hierarchy, which is not part of the language, and just moving around individual columns in the report. So at this point, here is where we cannot use ALLEXCEPT. What's the alternative? Well, the alternative is to apply a pattern which has two functions. Number one, remove filters customer. Number two, restore the filter using values for the column that you want to keep in the filter context, which in this case is customer continent. This approach, remove filter values instead of ALLEXCEPT table column, is what allows me to obtain exactly this result regardless of the columns that I included in the visual. How does it work? Well, the idea is the following. Let me go back a few steps here. The filter context, for example, for a country now is this one. But we don't have this, actually. The filter context we have is just this one. So we don't have this filter. We only have the country, right? And what happens in the code that I wrote now? Let me show you the code, and let me comment what is happening. So first, values is evaluated. When you have multiple arguments in calculate, the precedence, let's say the evaluation order is 1, evaluate filters, 2, apply context transition if there is context transition, 3, apply modifiers like remove filter, 4, apply the filter that you calculated at step 1. So the step 1 evaluates values in the current filter context. Now the current filter context has UK, so somewhere this happens in this filter context, a table with just the list of the continents visible for the current filter context is created. And this filter is just continent Europe. This table, which is a filter, is prepared before calculate. Number 2, context region. There is no context region. Number 3, remove filters. Okay, number 3, we remove the filter. Here we go. The filter is gone. Let's use this one. The filter is gone. Now the filter context is empty, but number 4, apply the filter that you evaluated at step 1. So this filter that has been evaluated before is not this one, sorry. The filter that you see here is moved into the filter context. Now, what do we have in the filter context? The corresponding continent, and we have the filter that we want. So basically, whenever you have a similar problem, I displayed the simpler example, which is the percentage of continent, but you might have many other similar examples where you know that given a filter on a certain column, there should be only one other value corresponding in the same table or in some other column or table. And so you always have these two options, but ALLEXCEPT requires you to have in the visual the column that is at a higher hierarchical level, whereas this pattern of remove filter values is more flexible, which means that ALLEXCEPT is very rarely used because remove filter values allows us more flexibility, doesn't have many constraints for the report. So that's the conclusion. When you have ALLEXCEPT, remember, consider alternatives if you want to create a model that is more resilient over the changes that the user can make. And this is a generic pattern that you can use to retrieve the value at a particular hierarchical level. Thank you for attending. 20 minutes is short. If you have any questions, I'm available. Thank you.